Afternoon. I'm the first in the tag team match. I'm John Wayland. I want you to imagine what happened when Orville Wright walked into the newspaper and said in Kitty Hawk and said, "I've just flown." And the reporter sat there and said, and went into the editor and said, "There's a bloke out the back who said he's just flown." And the editor, of course, would have said, as in duck, as in quack, quack. And he said, "I didn't ask him that." And I want you also to imagine what happened when a woman called Lisa Meitner wrote to the two great physicists, Rutherford and Oliphant, working in Manchester University trying to split the atom, and said, "You blokes are all doing it wrong. You're trying to split the atom the wrong way." Well, of course, you can imagine that Rutherford and Oliphant sat there and said, "You know, a lady in Stockholm sitting on a log has worked out how to split the atom? You've got to be joking." Samuel Morse was a painter, and he came up with Morse code. Charles Darwin was going into the ministry. Now, people who go into the ministry aren't Steve Jobs of this world. They're not blokes who paint their hair green. And when he got on the Beagle in 1836 and gave his mother a kiss goodbye, I don't think he said to her, "Mother, I'm going around the world to prove that man and an ape are related." Because Mother would have said, "Don't come back. Stay there." And he didn't go around the world and find that. He came home with swags. He was training as a geologist. And he came home and spent years, Morse spent years, 10, 15 years. So it isn't an easy process. It isn't something that just pops out of the woodwork. And when Simon Crane, the major shareholder of Lovells, and I walk around the factory occasionally, we don't go around and say, "I've just invented a light bulb, what a wonderful time, I've got a great idea." It's not about the instant invention. We're doing things out there at the moment, and Simon mainly is doing things in putting elastomer around a spring, and that's taken 3 years. And I personally have spent about 8 years trying to get hydrogen into a diesel engine, hydrogen on demand into a diesel engine, because when you do, you reduce emissions, you increase power, you reduce fuel consumption, but the New South Wales government have never heard of it. Go to Green Trucks Partnership and you will find, Google it, and you will find, they've never heard of it. They talk about catalytic converters. And when you say to them hydrogen, they say, "Are you all right?" And I say, no, I'm just like Orville Wright. And they say, "Like who?" And I say, "It doesn't matter." It's not an easy process, and people think that it's all about bing time, bling time. It's all going to happen. Now, I resolved, can I have that book? I resolved not to stand up here and tell you some bad news, because when you do have a look at things such as where we stand in the OECD model, we're 19. We're ahead of Papua New Guinea. And the New Zealanders are beating us. That's terrible. And when you sit down and you read Terry Cutler's reports, and I've read all the reports on the innovation system that have been reported to Canberra in Innovation Australia, they're all depressing. You wouldn't really want to read them too often, so I won't go through all of those processes except some of the key things. For example, tech vouchers, when they give them $1 to spend getting a PhD out of a company, the return they've measured is 3 to 1, 4.5 to 1 on a tech voucher. Now, if I go down the coast and do a real estate subdivision, I expect 25 to 1. If I gave $1 to Brian Hodges when he floated Bradkin and said, "Here's $1, go and make some money out of it," and he came back to me after 10 years with a 3 to 1 return, everybody would sack him and sack the board. So the figures aren't really wonderful. When you see that South Korea is spending 4% of its GDP, and really, look, the problem we've got in this country is economists. They really are the terrors of this. We should elect the Department of Treasury. We don't worry about electing politicians. It's the Department of Treasury. And I want to tell you, some of my best friends are economists. You know, they really do. They ring me up and they say, you can expect my cheque in the mail in the morning. And I trained as an economist, but Korea is 4%. And when you read Terry Cutler's report a while ago, he says that the innovation system is old, needs recasting, and has a terrible problem. And it names these problems: human capital and patient venture capital. But when you look at the ABS statistics, it says that over 40% companies have an active role in innovation. Innovation is not a light bulb moment. It's not somebody suddenly saying, wowee, I've discovered penicillin, which of course was a mistake. Or Nobel saying, I've discovered dynamite, which was a mistake. The dynamite, the nitroglycerine leaked into the diatomaceous earth and stabilised the explosive power. You see, I've done a lot of homework on this, because you might ask, why am I here? Well, I'm here because in 2012, John asked me to present to HunterNet a paper on innovation, and this isn't my forte. I mean, I want to go out there and sell more bits of steel to the mining industry and a different bit of steel. But I stood up and put on a paper for him. And I'm here because I'm also an innovator trying to get hydrogen, and I'm selling kits. I'm really selling hydrogen on demand kits that are putting hydrogen into light vehicles. And I've done research on aerofoils on trucks, and you might say, well, what's the matter with you? Why would you be doing that? Well, it's just because I drove down the expressway in the rain and I saw all this terrible water going all over the place, and I realised that if you reduce the coefficient of drag on a semi-trailer, you'd reduce the fuel consumption by 15%. So I went out to the university wind tunnel testing and said, would you like to put this thing and this gadget and this widget on a semi-trailer? And boy, you know, it's so simple. So I've done my own innovation, and working in Lovell Springs is a very challenging environment, because even this morning Simon Crane walked into the company and said to me, before he'd even had his first cup of tea, I've got a great idea. I've got a great idea. This goes on all the time. I've got a great idea. And when we put in ISO 9000, I got a great idea means that we have to sit down with the people in manufacturing and the people in marketing and sit there. And when they first brought the paper into me, number 4 on the agenda was, anybody got a good ideas? Tell you what, it isn't 4 anymore, it's number 1. What are the good ideas? And unfortunately, I wanted to show you one of the blokes that works in our factory today. He's called Scott. And we talked to Scott because he comes up with a great idea. And he sat down with Simon the other day in the factory and he said, look, if you got this and you did that and it seems to jam, it's because that's steel and this is steel. What would happen if you put a bit of copper in there? And he's talking to a bloke who's got honours degrees in thermodynamics. Scott had come up with the coefficient of expansion. He didn't know it in those terms. He didn't understand the second law of thermodynamics or whatever. But you talk to Scott and that's where it comes from. So Michael and I have picked up the challenge of saying, what are we going to do to help SMEs? And we are at the coalface with SMEs. We're both members of HunterNet, we're both members of AI Group. We go around the place, we know Bernie and we know Tommy and we know all of these people. Now, Michael's going to talk about some little things that we've done. And please, none of these are silver bullets. Nothing that we present to you is the solution, because we've still got to have a lot of money poured into the CSIRO for research. The internet that came about because of Tim Berners-Lee, TBL as he's known in the language, the internet came about because TBL was sitting down in CERN where they're working on colliding small particles. And TBL sat down and said to the bloke over there, what are you working on? And he said, I'm doing this paper. And he said, what are you doing? He said, I'm doing that paper. He said, you know what? If we could get these two people to talk to each other. And so he came up with HTML. He already had the platform, designed the internet and gave it to the world for nothing. Marvellous man. They haven't even given him a knighthood. But still, you know, some of the great people of England, they haven't given knighthoods to. So we've put together a few little exercises, but there are a few things that I just want to put down as a thought. Firstly, I think that we are too driven by research coming up with solutions instead of collaborative software that puts up the problem. Now, if you go to 9 Sigma, you will find a worldwide collaborative research software system where GE put up on the web, we have a problem. The whole of the United States Defence Department is built on collaborative software. The people in the United States Defence Department said, you know what, we want to have an aeroplane to fly over. No, we want to have an unmanned plane to fly over Afghanistan and be able to pick out someone in a T-singlet or in a T-tail around his head and kill him, but we don't want our pilots killed. And they put that up on their collaborative software, in-house, password protected, and bingo. Now we've got drones. You know, it's not a great thing to have, but as an example, I don't like killing people. So we've come up with a number of things that are not sole solutions. One of the other things that we know is this. If we go out to SMEs and say evangelism, religion, innovation, it all sits with them in that category because they've spent thousands of dollars putting in quality, which they did in the 1990s, and then the Australian government went and bought all the widgets overseas. They then came around and they said, oh, what you've got to have is a skip program, or you've got to have lean before you can supply widgets to the railroad manufacturers. So everybody spent $10,000, $20,000 putting in lean manufacturing. But they didn't work it out that they needed to put it into the primes first, because all the railroad manufacturing, of course, has now gone to India and China and places like that, and all the companies that have spent all that thousands and thousands of dollars haven't got a market. So we've got to dress this thing up in something different. When Simon and I are sitting there talking about his new idea, we don't talk about it as innovation, we talk about it as an improvement, as change, as those sorts of things. We don't talk about it, we don't name it innovation because he doesn't believe in religion. So they're the things that I just want to leave with you, and I'm going to come back later on and have a little bit of fun. Michael Murray.
As John said, our interest jointly, we've been around the block a few times, you may have noticed, with grey and receding hair. We've seen a bit. Our passion really is trying to take the lessons that we've learnt and do something useful for local businesses. And particularly through the extensive research that John's done, through our own work as business owners and directors, and also in our efforts to help others, particularly driven by John's research, which has been fantastic. We've come up with some initial thoughts on a structure, a way in which small businesses can start to approach the generation of new ideas in a systematic way. And really, for me, innovation is very simple. It's just a new idea that makes your business more valuable. It improves it in some very practical way. It's not necessarily an invention, it's just something smart that you've and your team, your staff have found that's going to improve the value of your business. So here are the things that we've learned from our practical efforts and our research. That for a business to become an innovation builder, an idea generator over time and to keep doing it, the first thing they have to do is sort out their strategy and the culture of the business. Where do you fit? What is it you do? What are you good at? And what relevance is that to people out there now? And what relevance will it be to them tomorrow? Who cares? What are they going to buy? What's important to them? You need to understand that, otherwise you're just throwing confetti up in the air and hoping some of it lands on you. Waste of money, waste of time. So this thing starts with discipline and a clear understanding of where you are and where you want to go. And then secondly, and I gave an example to one of the folk earlier, I ran a business strategy session for a company a few years ago, and at morning tea time, I had to get the managing director to leave the room because no one would talk. So the culture in that business was driven by his master's voice. When the leader spoke, everyone else shut up and deferred to his opinion. That is not going to work. You have to create a sense of fun, almost play, amongst every employee in that organisation. They have to get back to enjoying thinking and coming up with clever things to do in their job, whether they be the humble receptionist or the leader of R&D out the back. Work has to be fun, it has to be exciting, and they've got to be recognised and rewarded for applying their abilities to generating those new ideas. So, the starting point, figure out where you're going to go and get your people switched back on to thinking instead of just turning up and going through the motions. So, they're ready to go. Now you better start getting some ideas organised. Where are they going to come from? There are three fundamental spaces that you need to start stimulating. Firstly, within teams. So team leaders, no matter how big or small, and the crew that work with them have to start turning their attention to the aspects of the business strategy that they are most directly supporting and find ways of tweaking the things that they're doing to add that value that we spoke about earlier. What can this team do, whether it's a finance and admin team, a marketing team, a product development team? Everyone has a role in this, and the ideas must start from within each of those teams. Secondly, across business units, and again, whether that's between the finance and admin team, the marketing team and the production team, or between full business units that are producing different product streams. They need to have opportunities to bounce ideas off each other, to bring back different perspectives from the market, from their experience in making and selling and moving these things on. And that includes services, obviously, not just goods. And thirdly, you better get outside the firm and connect the dots. You're not going to find all the good ideas. The theory is that Sony lost its place in the market because its engineers started thinking it was the source of all good engineering ideas. And that was the beginning of the end of their position in the market. Get out, give your people time to connect, to engage in other places and spaces where they can take challenges and ideas they have and bring other knowledge into that space. To do that, the owner of the business has got to put together a toolkit because, again, you can't just tell people to go and do those things. What are they going to do? So part of John and my work is figuring out a facilitated model, essentially, a set of simple tools that a business leader, a champion inside the organisation or an external party can guide discussions, guide processes that will help them come up with a set of useful ideas that will build that strategy and take it forward. Secondly, I can promise you not all ideas are going to be good. And in fact, there are many businesses gone under because the boss had a good idea. Unfortunately, it wasn't such a good idea and a lot of money got poured down the drain and the company went bust. You have to find a way of focusing on those ideas that will truly add value. And that means that you are going to have to find a way of screening those ideas that is seen as sensible, just and fair by all of those within the organisation and the owners of the business who are funding it. And you're going to need to build a system which will include budgeting. You're going to have to make provision with some funds to test those ideas that float to the top, that come through that screening system and are seen as being potentially very useful ideas for the business to pursue. Now again, here comes the discipline bit. None of that is going to happen in an ad hoc fashion. You will need to build a set of simple but appropriate processes within the organisation to enable that screening and the development of those ideas to flow. And that will include, obviously, the larger sections of funding that you're going to need if the idea is a really good one, and it's going to need extra capital to get it moving. Next, if the idea is proven to work, you've executed it, it's delivered value, get it out there into other parts of the business. obviously particularly applies more to a larger business. Could be in a branch scenario where you have different sites and the idea needs to get to every site as quickly as possible, or it could be across different business divisions. But you must find ways to get it out there quickly. So how are you going to do that? Again, think it through, put the processes in place and make sure that you can generate that diffusion as quickly and effectively as possible. Another long-term platform that leaders in the business particularly, and those of you familiar with Bassanavoglio's full-range leadership model will know that transformational leaders are very, very good at teasing out new ideas from their team members. And that's a very important long-term investment from leaders. Keep the energy going. Teach people to think creatively. It can be done. It's not something that's genetically coded into us. Creative thinking can be fostered and developed in the workplace. And the final piece of the puzzle from our research is that this is a long-term journey. This is not just about finding the one good idea. If you start this thing, you've got to start it with a long-term view in mind. That means that the leadership team have to keep pouring energy into it. They have to keep encouraging and fostering the activities that lead to the positive execution of the ideas. And they need to ensure that there are no barriers emerging in the culture of the business, the behaviours of its staff, its leaders, that are going to start to stifle that creative energy within the organisation. So, folks, that's where we've got to with our work so far. Our concern is, I'm sure you'll all be aware, that the vast majority of not only self-help books, I've got a Tony Robbins book sitting on the shelf at home, but also many, many business publications are never even read beyond the first chapter. So we would certainly enjoy receiving feedback, having a coffee with you and further developing this model, because we believe it's the genesis of something that may be very useful for small business owners in helping them build a practical set of day-to-day steps that will take their business forward. So thank you very much for your time, and John is going to come back to close the session.